Morning, everybody. Welcome to Sky News live from Downing Street. Just moving out of the way.
Italian time's up.
Tomorrow's with me. Who's that tomorrow?
That was Nigel Adams, a key ally, and Chris Heaton-Harris, the Chief Whip. So they were both going in to see the Prime Minister. When the Chief Whip goes to see the Prime Minister, he gives him an assessment of whether he has the party support on any given issue. But today he will be giving him an assessment, really, if he has the party support, full stop, having lost his fifth cabinet minister in the last 15 minutes, which is previous loyalist Brandon Lewis, who said it's a matter of personal regret that this government, he says, lacks honesty, integrity and mutual respect.
Yeah, now there's a bit of confusion over the number that have resigned. It is 5 because people forget about Oliver Dowden. That was just less than a couple of weeks ago.
Well, we've had 5 gone anyway because you had Rishi Sunak, Sajid Javid, Michael Gove, Simon Hart and now Brandon Lewis.
Michael Gove was sacked.
And of course 5 resigned if you include Oliver Dowden, but 5 gone from his cabinet, only 2 of those positions having been filled. And in the junior ranks you have dozens upon dozens of ministers who have left their posts. And while you can always convince somebody to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, does Boris Johnson really have the authority to ask any of the remaining MPs who support him to go into any of those jobs? I'll just show you Brandon Lewis's resignation letter.
I just wanted to ask you about the Chief Whip, if I may, first of all. Larry's out. I've never seen the Chief Whip, in all the time I've been covering politics, go in the front door of number 10 this early in the morning. That's making a statement right there.
It is, going in the front, he could have gone in the side. And look, Chris Heaton-Harris, who's the new-ish Chief Whip, who was appointed in February after the Partygate debacle to try and steady the ship, along with Chris Pincher, and we know how that all ended up. He is said to be of the view that the Prime Minister is going to find it hard to continue. He and other cabinet ministers were in there yesterday telling the Prime Minister the truth about his position with Conservative MPs. We know that when Michael Gove told him some hard truths yesterday morning, he ended up being sacked by the end of the day. But there have been many cabinet ministers, reportedly including his new Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, telling the Prime Minister, you have not got the support of your party and it would be better to go now on your own terms rather than wait to be dragged from office. But it looks at the moment as if Boris Johnson is going to stay on.
OK, so that group of cabinet ministers that went in to see him yesterday, the Prime Minister didn't come back in through the front door, updating people as we go, because literally minute by minute, let's try and find out what's going on. Brandon Lewis resigning was breaking news 10 minutes ago. Now we're seeing the Chief Whip going up in the front door. Brandon Lewis should have been with that group yesterday, but he was stuck in Northern Ireland.
He was in Northern Ireland. His flight was delayed and he came back late last night. And there was some confusion about whether some people were saying he had resigned last night, and that was denied. He has resigned this morning. But let's think for a minute also, beyond the drama in Westminster and Brandon Lewis, what Brandon Lewis's resignation means for Boris Johnson. You've also got Northern Ireland that has had no government for the last 2 months. And so he leaves Northern Ireland in a state of turmoil at the moment and great uncertainty about what is happening at the moment regarding getting their government up and running, services up and running, and of course the Northern Ireland protocol issue. So a lot hanging in the balance while Boris Johnson's future is played out here.
Talk to me about Brandon Lewis. He's not necessarily a household name to many of our viewers this morning, but he has been pretty influential in this government in all sorts of positions.
He has talked a lot about how he became Conservative as a teenager. He has been party chairman, a quite high-profile position in the sense of going on television, talking about doing some difficult media rounds in that post. And he's, despite the fact that he's Northern Ireland Secretary, which is often a position where you're not always on the TV screens, because he is so assured, Boris Johnson often put him forward to come and talk to the media on very difficult issues. And he's also been doing his bit to convince Tory MPs to support the Prime Minister during that leadership vote last month. So he is a loyalist. He is someone who you would have thought would have defended the Prime Minister right to the end. But if Brandon Lewis thinks that this is now the end of the road for Boris Johnson, then that is a sign that even the really, really loyal cabinet ministers are deserting him at this point.
Now, he resigned this morning?
Or he resigned this morning, 6:47, the letter was posted. We don't know yet. We'll bring you as we find out whether he warned Boris Johnson. But the key bits in that letter are, I cannot sacrifice my personal integrity to defend things as we are now. And the last line, a decent and responsible government relies on honesty, integrity and mutual respect. I no longer believe those values are being upheld. And he talks about how difficult a decision this was because of the difficulties in Northern Ireland and how he knows the stakes of leaving his post at the moment. But clearly, this is an attempt by the Cabinet to say, you cannot carry on like this. We have to have new leadership. And they are not waiting until we expect the 1922 committee changes the rules on Monday and potentially has another confidence vote next week. They're acting now.
Talk to me about Helen Whately. She's also gone. Not a great performer when it comes to media rounds, but she was again, a very solid minister, wasn't she?
Served under Brandon Lewis as deputy chairman, so they know each other. I wonder if that was it's interesting that this has happened at the same time. Yes, she has been a care minister during the COVID crisis, and then she's also been a Treasury minister. And it's interesting that the Treasury, so she worked under Rishi Sunak, have pretty much deserted the ship now. We saw Rishi Sunak gone shortly after the very long-standing City Minister John Glenn left. Now Helen Whately's gone. I mean, you've barely got a functioning Treasury at this point.
Welsh Secretary, we saw him stride up Downing Street yesterday. He was leading the charge, wasn't he?
Indeed, and Simon Hart, the Welsh Secretary, of course, he was on TV on Friday morning when the full truth of the Chris Pincher issue and what the Prime Minister, what was known about it was becoming clear, but the Prime Minister was still trying to defend him staying on as an MP, and it was Simon Hart who was in the TV studios not defending the government line that Chris Pincher should stay on as an MP, but saying, look, I don't think it will last the day, effectively, and I know what my own views on this subject are. So he was dissenting last week on this Chris Pincher issue, and I think the sense that ministers are aggrieved at having to go out and say things which are untrue or unravel within minutes was very clear in Simon Hart's interviews last Friday, and so he has now left his post. So Boris Johnson deserted now by 5 of his cabinet ministers, either resigned or sacked in the last few days. And last night, one of his private secretaries, one of his aides, James Dudridge, was out saying there's going to be more cabinet changes. That didn't happen last night. Will it happen today? Will Boris Johnson be saying to Chris Eaton-Harris, look, I'm replacing all these people and carrying on?
Let me just read what Simon Hart said. He said, I desperately hope that I could avoid writing this letter, but alas, there seems no other option left but to step down from my role as Secretary of State for Wales. He goes on to say, I have never been a massive fan of ministerial resignations being the best means of forcing change. Colleagues have done their utmost in private and public to help you turn the ship around, but it is with sadness that I feel we have passed the point where this is possible. I think it's fair to say that with 25%, probably more than 25% of those on the payroll having resigned, or one of them been sacked, do we have a functioning government this morning?
Well, there are at least 20 ministerial posts vacant if you take out all the sort of very junior bag carrier roles which don't necessarily need to be filled to run the government, and some ministers do more than one role. So we're 20 down. It's hard to see how those people are replaced. I think Simon Hart's letter saying that I'm not a fan of this approach to force people from office. That is what they're now trying to do. That is what the Cabinet are now trying to do, to try and force Boris Johnson from office by resigning en masse. And this is echoes of the end of Margaret Thatcher and what was come to be described as the men in grey suits going to see her to say, time's up now. This is what the Cabinet are trying to do. Don't wait for the 1922 committee to force you out. Don't have an election, which Boris Johnson refused to rule out several times yesterday, and lose. They're saying just go now for the good of the Conservative Party and let somebody else take over. Whether he will heed those calls, it is not clear yet.
Yeah, that was him striding up on the phone yesterday. Yeah. They often use that trick when they're not talking to anybody. Saves them being shouted at by the press, but we give it a go anyway. And to that end, I'm going to do the papers in just a second. We've just seen the Chief Whip go in.
Yeah.
And if you're just joining us, the Chief Whip, for the second time in 24 hours, has gone in to see the Prime Minister. How unusual is that?
It is unusual to see him at this time of the morning, 6:30 in the morning. The Chief Whip sees the Prime Minister all the time, every day that
What
we
does
vote.
the Chief Whip do?
The Chief Whip is in charge of party discipline, and so the Chief Whip will be saying to the Prime Minister every day, oh, you've got to vote on this difficult issue. There are 20 people who are not sure they want to vote for it, and I've talked round 2 and there are others who won't vote for it, but you'll still win, or you might narrowly lose, or whatever. They'll give the Prime Minister a sense where the party's at on different issues, and they'll also be in charge of seeing whether there are any particular issues with specific MPs that they will deal with. He's gone in there with Nigel Adams, who's also a minister and is one of Boris Johnson's closest allies. He was out and about during Partygate defending the Prime Minister, and they will be in there talking to him about what the options are as it stands.
OK, I want to try and make sense of some of the jargon that we use for our viewers this morning, because a lot of people who are watching, they're not in the Westminster bubble, they're not completely sure. A lot of questions I was asked yesterday, people kept saying to me, what do you mean they've retired from, or they've resigned from government? What does that actually mean? Because are they still an MP? Are they still a Conservative? What does that actually mean?
If someone resigns from their department, so when Rishi Sunak resigns from the Treasury, he will have had lots of different important issues going on, pieces of legislation, meetings with key business groups. He leaves the Treasury and goes home, and the officials, the civil servants carry on working, but he leaves the building and has no leadership. No one is taking decisions in there. He's still an MP. MPs can only be kicked out by the voters. They can have the whip of the party taken away from them, but they can only be removed as an MP by the voters. But when a minister leaves their department, they leave all of the issues that they are presiding over in limbo. And so that is why this is a difficult decision for ministers. People were saying last night, Michael Gove has been crucial in trying to get some of these issues to do with dangerous cladding on buildings and giving people compensation. There are, hundreds of thousands of people, as we've reported, who were hoping to get compensation. They are in limbo. The Northern Ireland government, which has been suspended for 2 months, is in limbo. The issues the Welsh Secretary was dealing with are not being looked at today. So when ministers have to be replaced in these departments in order to try and get anything done.
Did I see a tweet, I think late last night or early this morning, from a Labour MP saying that the meeting that she was supposed to be involved with, the committee that she was involved with, just couldn't go ahead because there weren't any ministers?
Yes, all the progressive legislation that you never see happens in committee rooms behind the scenes, where they go through all these different amendments before it's put to Parliament again. This process needs MPs of all parties and ministers for those departments. And you've got some departments, like Michael Gove's Levelling Up department, which has only got one minister in it. So if there's anything they need to do in Parliament today, that minister will have to do all of it.
But how does this impact on our viewers at home this morning, wherever you're watching us from this morning? But, OK, these ministers are resigning left, right and centre in order to try to get Boris Johnson out of the building behind us. It has to be said also that even if he's ousted on Tuesday, he'll still be Prime Minister until the autumn, probably.
Yes, so what does Boris Johnson do now? He's lost 5 cabinet ministers. We now have some of the super loyal people, like Brandon Lewis, resigning. Suella Braverman, who we've not talked about yet, the Attorney General, has been incredibly loyal to Boris Johnson. She was recently accused of ruling his Northern Ireland protocol plans to be legal just to be supportive of the Prime Minister. She said last night that she thinks he should go now and that she is thinking of running for the leadership.
Good for her.
Out of the traps.
It's going to be a crowded field.
It's going to be a crowded field. And so we're now at that stage where people are openly saying, his allies are openly saying the Prime Minister should go and trying to run themselves.
But what happens?
So what happens? Well, if the Prime Minister decides that it's over today, or it is decided by people in the Conservative Party that it's over next week, what would normally happen, as we saw with David Cameron and Theresa May, they would announce they're going. There's a leadership contest, which has voting by MPs and voting by Conservative members. And normally, the Prime Minister would stay as Prime Minister for that period with all the functions of being Prime Minister.
How long does that take?
Because you can never have no Prime Minister. So that normally takes a couple of months, actually. I mean, with Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom, the contest ran short because Andrea Leadsom pulled out, so it can be quick. But with the election of Boris Johnson, remember there was about 10 different candidates. It all actually took quite a long time. So it can take a couple of months while the previous Prime Minister stays in office. If something different were to happen, for example, Boris Johnson were to decide he didn't want to stay in office, then the Queen would need to appoint somebody else to be Prime Minister. So the convention is the Prime Minister stays.
Damien Hinds resigned as Security Minister within the last few seconds. Damien Hinds, tell us about him, Security Minister.
Well, he had at one point been in the Cabinet.
These papers down, I don't think we're going to get to them.
Education Secretary. He's now Security Minister at the Home Office. He is, I wouldn't put him in the uber loyal to Boris Johnson camp, but he was seen as a very safe pair of hands. After the sad death of James Brokenshire. He was given that post as Security Minister, and he was generally very well regarded in government. But this is again the people who don't raise their heads above the parapet. We saw many of these people in that category yesterday. People like Robin Walker, the Schools Minister, and these people are now saying we don't want to stay in government. And if you've got someone very senior in charge of security at the Home Office leaving their post, this is again, can the government function? Can Boris Johnson appoint anyone else to do that job? Let's take a look at the letter. Yes, let's take a look at the letter.
If you like.
Damien Hines says, with regret, I must resign from the government. I'm grateful to you for asking me to return as Security Minister last year. It's been a particular privilege to serve in this role and have the opportunity to support those working tirelessly to keep our country safe. And he talks about how he wishes the next Security Minister well with delivering into law the National Security Bill, the Economic Crime Bill and the Protect Duty Bill. So ministers are working on all different things at the time that they leave office. He talks about the Prime Minister's great achievements with the vaccine programme and Ukraine, and says, but more important than any government or leader are the standards we uphold in public life and faith in our democracy and public administration. Because of the serious erosion in these, I've come to the conclusion the right thing for our country and our party is for you to stand down as Prime Minister. He says, I'd hoped you would take this course sooner of your own volition, but as it has become clear you intend to stay, I cannot continue to serve in your administration. So we've now got ministers saying, I'm going because you're not going, basically.
Here's a question. If all these people start to step down and he doesn't have enough people to fill because they don't want him to be Prime Minister, but he can still be Prime Minister to the autumn, then what does he do? Does it mean that we've got a government that is basically in aspic until the autumn?
Well, if Boris Johnson were to decide that he's going to step down, which sort of looks inevitable at some point, but he's holding on for now, then yes, he would announce he would announce a leadership contest, and then the Conservative Party and the 1922 committee would work out what the timetable is. They would say nominations first, then rounds of voting.
But what my question is, all these people don't want to work with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, even if you...
During that period,
so what happens?
There would be a question about whether they agree to return to their role. This has never happened before, okay?
I know.
It's never happened before. We've never had this many resignations.
It's quite exciting.
It's very exciting. It's very unprecedented, but it's also very uncertain for a lot of people who are relying on these important decisions. And we've never had the situation before. There's a chance, of course, that if Boris Johnson were to say, look, I understand the game's up, that some of them would return to serve for a couple of months until that contest, or he may be able to appoint other people, but you'd have a lot of new people in crucial jobs. So I think if the Prime Minister were to do that, there's a chance they would come back, but we really don't know because this has not happened before. This is unprecedented.
So someone who was incredibly loyal to the Prime Minister until he was removed from post so that a position for Dominic Raab could be created was Sir Robert Botland. He was the former Justice Secretary with us now. Hello to you, Sir Robert. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Thoughts on these flurry of resignations so far this morning? It's only 7:20.
Yes, and I think, if the writing wasn't on the wall last night, I'm afraid it's very clearly written on the wall this morning. And the Prime Minister, I think, has no choice but to leave office. He now needs to think about the good, not just of the party, but actually of the country. And, to quote him back about him not wanting politicians to talk about themselves, well, now it seems to me the best way to do that is for him to go and for us to get back to the priorities of the people of our country, whether it's cost of living, the threat of war in Europe and indeed war in Europe and all those international issues that are having an effect here at home.
Perhaps you can help Tamara and I out with that question that we were posing to each other, which was all these people having resigned, even if the Prime Minister does go or is forced to go with a vote of no confidence, perhaps as early as next Tuesday because of the 1922 committee rule changes potentially, or these potentials, will those people then be asked to go back into post until we've got a new leader, given that if they don't, we don't have a functioning government and the Prime Minister could still be in number 10 until the autumn?
Well, a very good point, Kay. I think we are in uncharted waters. I think what's crucial is that we have enough people carrying out the functions of government. It would be like a sort of caretaker period where there wouldn't be new policy initiatives, but there's plenty, frankly, for the government to be getting on with. I didn't think this Prime Minister had a problem in terms of the number of initiatives that he's already announced. It's how to deliver them that really matters, and therefore what we need is the minimum necessary to do that. And of course, it's for the Conservative Party to get on with the job of quickly selecting a successor. I think the parliamentary votes could be held before the end of this term, and then if there needs to be a membership ballot, that could be done in August, and we could have a new leader in September. So we might only be talking about a period of 6 weeks or so. But I think it's important that the British Constitution is an unwritten thing. Okay? It's a thing of beauty and wonder, but it's not written down anywhere, and it does depend on all of us to be good team players and to respect convention, not to bring the Queen into any controversy, to be good team players. The Prime Minister's got an opportunity to do that and to show at the end of his premiership that respect for the Constitution and for our system of government that
just let me interrupt you, Sir Robert, if I may. I'm so sorry. We're just hearing that the Science Minister, George Freeman, has also just stepped down. So he has just announced that he cannot work with the Prime Minister, and he has also stepped down. That's 50 MPs, 50 members of government now on the government payroll have stepped down. This is not... What's he going to do?
Well, this is not normal, as you say, and through their resignations, colleagues like George and others, all friends and colleagues of mine, are expressing publicly what I and others have been saying now for the last 24 hours or so. It's increasingly obvious that, I'm afraid, because of personality issues, because of the lack of trust that now exists, that the Prime Minister cannot go on. I'm desperately sad about it, Kay. We came into office on a one-nation ticket. You know I believe in one-nation conservatism to my bones, and I wanted this Prime Minister to bring the country together. We dealt with COVID. We had an unprecedented challenge. These were huge and serious challenges, and he's been capable of so much. But no longer. We need fresh leadership, and we need a better leadership in order to deal with the huge challenges that our country faces.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere, though, is he? And he is the Prime Minister. You know, we have to recognise the office of Prime Minister. We have to give it due respect. But he has said that in order to get rid of me, you'll have to bathe your hands in blood. I think that's the Shakespearean reference. He's just not going to go unless he's forced to.
Well, OK, you've put it very well, if I may say so. Respect for the office of Prime Minister. But, you know, that includes the incumbent. The incumbent has to respect the office that they hold. And I can't think of any greater respect for that office than by honouring constitutional norms, by accepting the verdict of the party that he now needs to go, not just for the good of the party, but for the good of our country. We are better than this. He is better than this, I think, at the end of it all. And I hope he's asking himself this morning, really, can I now go on with so few colleagues supporting me? And I think he'll find the answers a resounding no. And then actually we can deliver the agenda that I know he believes in, which is one nation, Conservative government, bringing our country together, rising to the challenge of the cost of living and international threats, and being serious about the next few years and getting the job done, to again use his famous quote.
You have been a loyal lieutenant to this Prime Minister for a very long time. I've spoken to you often, and you've been on those media rounds, as we describe them, where the Minister goes out to talk to the public via the television studios in the mornings. What was the tipping point for you? What made you think, I can't support him any longer?
Well, not dissimilar to many other colleagues, I was absolutely prepared to give our elected Prime Minister and our elected leader the benefit of the doubt when it came to some of the issues relating, sadly, to parties and to other issues where, sadly, the truth seems to have been different from the original version of events. But, you know, there's a cumulative effect of this. And I've always felt, Kay, that at some point there would be a last straw moment. And I think, I'm afraid, in the obfuscation and excuse-making that we've seen in the last few days surrounding his former Deputy Chief Whip, it became increasingly clear to me that colleagues were being sent out to say things that just weren't true. You cannot run a government on that basis. The British people expect straightforwardness, integrity and honesty from our leaders. Sometimes things go wrong, and when things go wrong, you need to be able to explain that, to man up and explain it. And I saw an absence of that this week, and it's with huge sadness that I've concluded that this Prime Minister can no longer go on.
Well, we're just hearing from number 10 there saying that he's going to carry on with his reshuffle this morning. That needs to go ahead, of course, because of the changes that we've seen over the last couple of days. Just reading from George Freeman's letter, if you'll indulge me, please, Sir Robert, I wondered if you could comment on this. I'm afraid the culmination of your lack of transparency and candour with Parliament and willingness to ask your ministers to mislead Parliament, your removal of key pillars of the ministerial code, your handling of your appointment of a Deputy Chief Whip, who it turns out you knew had a history of sexual abuse allegations, is just too much. This is seriously damaging public trust and respect for government, democracy and the law. And this great party's long tradition at the party of standards, character, conduct, integrity and duty to office and country before partisan self-interest. And still, he goes on with the reshuffle.
Very strong words from George Freeman. I don't disagree with any of them. The Conservative Party is about respect for our Constitution, our rule of law. Margaret Thatcher talked about freedom under the law. It's something that I believe to my heart, and I think every Conservative believes the same. And therefore, when you have somebody who seems to think that their idea of the Premiership is them in it, I'm afraid that's not good enough. We as Conservatives, as people who are stewards of our country and our government, should expect and demand more from our leaders. And that's why there's one word, I'm afraid, that he needs to listen to, which is go.
I was flabbergasted yesterday when I was watching the telly at home and I heard that the senior cabinet had gone in to see him and the chief whip was there, figuratively, with the whiskey and the revolver. And still he said, no, I'm going nowhere. Did you think the game was up last night?
Well, I thought the game was up much earlier in the day. And frankly, the one person in whose hands this could have been dealt with is the Prime Minister. This could have been so different if there was a proper application to the issues at hand, a real focus on some of the question marks and challenges about the way he does things, the way he runs government. It was up to him to make those changes, to accept that we can all do better. You know, self-improvement is something I, again, very much believe in. We can always do better. We can always improve. And I think that lack of self-awareness almost and a sort of dogged belief that, it doesn't matter how you get there, we'll muddle through, I'm afraid just isn't good enough. The joke's over now and it's time to leave office.
Nadeem Zahawi, the new Chancellor, I spoke to him yesterday on the programme and he insisted that the Prime Minister had integrity. Do you think he does?
Well, I'm afraid he's displaying that he no longer has that. And, it's with huge sadness that I say that because I think that there are so many qualities about Boris Johnson. I've known him for many years and I've admired a lot of what he has done. Through COVID, through Brexit, we got things done and we got a lot done under his leadership. And there are many, many good things he'll be able to point to. But, the manner of one's leaving is also very important, and it's how somebody will be judged. And if a leader leaves with good grace, observing constitutional norms and accepting that however high he or she might have come, they only serve at the pleasure of the British people and indeed their party, then I think he will be able to emerge with at least some of his reputation intact. At the moment, he's single-handedly shredding that through every utterance we hear from number 10 this morning. This is now an unreal situation. To talk about reshuffling the deck, who's going to accept office? It is just absurd, and we need to end this farce now.
You've read my mind, I wanted to ask you, Sir Robert, how he will, because we are entering the endgame, however you look at it, the Prime Minister is done. How do you think he will be remembered? Will he be the Prime Minister who just wouldn't leave office until he was dragged out kicking and screaming? Or will he be the Prime Minister who got Brexit done?
Well, look, again, it's in his hands. I think that he wants to be remembered as the Prime Minister who got Brexit done and who stewarded us through the most unprecedented peacetime challenge in our history, the COVID crisis. 3 tumultuous years. It's not about length of time served, it's about what you did in office. And he'll be able to point to a lot of achievements. I was honoured to serve as his Lord Chancellor, getting important criminal justice reforms done, and we've achieved huge change to sentencing in our country, which I believe will make us safer. Lots of things he'll be able to point to with pride. But now is the time to exit the stage and to accept that with great sadness his premiership is over.
It's good to talk to you, Sir Robert. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just in that few minutes, 10 minutes that I've been speaking to Sir Robert, another 2 resignations tomorrow.
Well, first of all, the Prime Minister, according to a number 10 source, is continuing with his reshuffle. So that is apparently what he's doing in there with the Chief Whip, Chris Eden-Harris, trying to decide who's going to fill all these posts. And even if he is,
in his deck, isn't he?
Well, even if he is able to fill some of them, they're leaving quicker than he can fill them. George Freeman, I'm just reading through his letter, doesn't actually say he's resigning. He's actually just telling the Prime Minister to resign. He says that he blames the chaos in number 10, and now he just says it's actually slightly surprised in a way that George Freeman didn't resign yesterday. He's not known as someone who's a massive supporter of the Prime Minister, but he's now saying the chaos in number 10, the breakdown of cabinet collective responsibility, abandonment of the ministerial code, the defence of impropriety, insults to conservatism, I believe in and stand for. So he's just saying the Prime Minister should go. And that's what should happen.
Somebody will give him a ring and see if that. It reads like a resignation letter to me, but we'll see.
But we had a few others yesterday as well. One saying if the Prime Minister doesn't go, I will resign. So you've now just got MPs, as well as ministers resigning, MPs just openly saying to the Prime Minister, you should go now. There are some suggestions. When I was talking to some senior Conservatives yesterday and saying, look, if you had this leadership vote, how would it go? No one's in any doubt, really, that the Prime Minister does not have very much support in the Conservative Party.
Yeah. So we've lost 4 people this morning?
We have lost Brandon Lewis, the biggest name. He's from the Cabinet. We've lost Helen Whately, the Treasury Minister. And we've lost Damien Hinds, the Security Minister. George Freeman is calling on the Prime Minister to go.
OK. What's going to happen today?
Well, yesterday we had a day. Well, who knows? We're likely to see more resignations. We may well see more cabinet resignations because Simon Hart's letter, that's the Welsh Secretary who resigned late last night, he said, I don't want to do this to force you from office, but that's what I'm having to do. So we may get more resignations from the Cabinet in an effort to get the Prime Minister to go. We may get the Prime Minister, as suggested by number 10 source, appointing new people to some of these cabinet jobs, sacking people and appointing new people, as he sacked Michael Gove last night in probably the most shocking twist and turn of this whole saga.
I've just had a question from a viewer saying, does the Prime Minister actually read these letters of resignation, or does somebody read them for him?
Well, I suspect he's aware of their content, and I think most Conservatives think the Prime Minister is aware of the predicament that he's in, and even if he's not aware of it, people like Chris Eden-Harris, the Chief Whip, will tell him the predicament that he's in. But I think, as we often seen with the Prime Minister not sacking people when they commit misdemeanours. You remember he didn't sack Matt Hancock for breaking the COVID rules. Matt Hancock resigned, and he didn't want to sack Chris Pincher until he resigned himself, and then he was forced to withdraw the whip. He doesn't like to be bounced into things, and he seems to want to do this on his own terms, but the message very clearly from Conservative MPs is stop dragging us all down.
It is a resignation letter, I'm just being told.
That George Freeman is a resignation letter. OK, well, that's 5 then. 4 then this morning. Yeah. I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Yeah. I mean, probably the biggest beast would be the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis,
absolutely,
who was fiercely loyal to the Prime Minister.
Fiercely loyal to the Prime Minister, all the way through Partygate, all the way through all of the difficulties he's had. He was also dealing with a particularly important issue of this Northern Ireland Brexit arrangement. Of course, you remember that he, in order to try and make this work in the way the Prime Minister intended, he suggested that international law may be broken in a specific and limited way. He was bringing this controversial legislation through Parliament. He's obviously got a very sensitive job at a time with no government in Northern Ireland, and he's he is now going and saying to the Prime Minister, integrity matters, you have lost that, it's time to go.
And just to clarify before we recap for people who are just tuning our way this morning, what does that then mean for the changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol? Does that mean that is now on hold until he fills that Northern Ireland?
Well, the legislation's been introduced to Parliament, and at some stage it will need to be taken through. So it's had, I think it's had a vote already. It's had a second reading vote. So it will need to now. There are further stages down the line. But when a government minister, when a Secretary of State leaves their post, they leave someone else to pick all this stuff up. And if the whole government were to fall, we would get a new Prime Minister, then they would need to decide what they want to do. So everything is in limbo.
Oof, OK, Tamara, thanks very much indeed. You're very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. We're trying to unpick it for you as best we can. It's a very, very fluid situation, I think I'm right in saying. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to the former Director of Comms at Downing Street. He was on yesterday. More than 1/3 people had a look on our Twitter feed to see what he had to say. That's Alastair Campbell, back again this morning. Boris Johnson continues to fight off calls for his dismissal. Speaking again to Chris Bryant, he was here yesterday. He questioned the Prime Minister yesterday as part of that liaison committee. What was the mood like as it started to trickle through the news that more and more people were resigning and that there was a posse of cabinet ministers waiting for him at Downing Street when he came back? And somebody else who was there was the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. As the Prime Minister tries to cling on to power, the backbencher and also chairman of the Defence Committee, what does he make of it all? This morning, a flurry of resignations in the last half an hour, taking the total number now to, I think, 50 tomorrow? 50? Yeah, there you go. Leaving Boris Johnson's government. George Freeman, the Science Minister, is the latest to step down, hot on the heels of the Security Minister, Damien Hinds, the Treasury Minister, Helen Wakely, and most significantly, perhaps, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis. Let's take a look again at how things stand this morning. Since the resignation of the Chancellor and the Health Secretary on Tuesday evening, there's been a deluge of Conservative MPs handing in letters of resignation. The total is now at 50. Here's how things are looking this morning. 4 members of the Cabinet. In fact, if you take into account Oliver Dowden, who resigned a couple of weeks ago, that would be 5. 19 ministers, 22 parliamentary private secretaries, 4 envoys and 1 vice chairman have resigned from their positions. Let's take a look again at what Brandon Lewis, the 4th Cabinet Minister to go, wrote in his letter to the PM. This was on Twitter, and this is what the Northern Ireland Secretary had to say. A decent and responsible government relies on honesty, integrity and mutual respect. It's a matter of profound personal regret that I must leave government, as I no longer believe those values are being upheld. Alastair Campbell is with us now. Hello to you, Mr. Campbell. You were very forthright in your views yesterday, and still the Prime Minister is in power.
Well, he's in the building behind you. I don't think we can call it in power. We don't have a functioning government. We don't have a functional Prime Minister. And this is what happens when you put somebody like him in charge. Boris Johnson is somebody who thinks the rules don't apply to him. He's operated by that his entire existence. And what you're seeing here is a single human being testing massive constitutional principles. He talks about this mandate that he got from the British people. He got the votes from the people of Uxbridge. He was the leader of the Conservative Party who won the election. He therefore became and remained as Prime Minister. You can only govern with continuing consent of the people. You can only govern with the support of Parliament, which he is losing, and you can only govern with the support of your cabinet, which he is losing as well. And so he is now seeking yet again to say that the normal rules of life and of politics do not apply to him. And he's damaging the country in a way that I worry is irreparable. You've seen there with Brandon Lewis. Brandon Lewis has gone. I've been agitating against Brandon Lewis for some time over the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think he should have gone some time ago, because breaking international law on such a vital matter of public interest is frankly grossly irresponsible. But how can you now have a functional government when one of the biggest challenges this government faces? Who's he going to put into Northern Ireland now? Who can he actually ask to take this on? So I just think that the whole thing is what happens when you get one narcissist, I think probably sociopathic, because this is now utter bunker mentality without any sense of responsibility to the wider world. And these cabinet ministers, fair play, some of them have stepped up. They've all got to step up, and they've all got to say, I'm sorry, your time's up, out you go, off you go, and we'll have to try and sort this mess out after you've gone.
They tried that yesterday, didn't seem to work.
Well, they tried it, Kay, but, they're doing it in their own different ways. Michael Gove, it seems, went and said to him, listen, your time's up. And what was Johnson's response? It was to, dig down deeper into the bunker, take out the revolver and shoot Michael Gove. There will be others in there. I don't know if it's true that Priti Patel has told him that he has to go. I don't know. I only rely, as you do, on what people are telling you. There's Larry the Cat on the doorstep. Larry the Cat right now would be a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. Anybody on the planet would be a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. Why? Because he's not capable of governing. This is what he lives for, getting into massive scrapes and then trying to get out of them.
Tamara just reminds me of an article that Boris Johnson wrote when Gordon Brown was holed up in number 10, seemingly clinging on for dear life. It is, perhaps something that desperate prime ministers do.
Well, I do think, Kay, that was a very different situation. Gordon Brown fought the election against David Cameron. The outcome was unclear. Yes, David Cameron got the biggest number of seats, but he didn't get a majority. And Gordon, I think, behaved incredibly responsibly. And I actually was in the room with Gordon Brown when he was on the phone to Nick Clegg. And I can remember word for word the words Gordon said to Nick Clegg. Nick, we cannot keep the Queen hanging around for ages. You have to make your mind up. And Nick Clegg made his mind up to go with David Cameron. So I think that is completely different. Gordon Brown was actually trying to make sure that the constitutional principles were upheld. What's happening with this guy is he's sitting there thinking, OK, I got away with lying to the Queen about prorogation of Parliament. I wonder if I can get away with doing it again now. The idea of this guy now leading the Conservative Party in a general election is frankly ridiculous. He's becoming utterly ridiculous. I think loathing of him is turning to absolute disgust. But the only thing I care about in this case is the damage that's being done to the country. I talked to you yesterday. I was getting hundreds of bits from news organisations around the world. This story is playing out right around the world. We are a global joke. And until this guy goes, the world will continue to laugh at us, and that will continue to damage us.
We are, we rather call ourselves the mother of all parliaments and are a little bit superior when it comes to other parliaments around the world. How come somebody who it would appear that almost all of the politicians that he represents want him out can still stay in power? What does that say about our political system?
It says that our political system depends entirely on the honourability of the people that we elect to positions of high office. And this is what happens when you elect somebody utterly dishonourable. When Margaret Thatcher was confronted by political reality of her cabinet colleagues saying to her, sorry, Margaret, you've been a marvellous Prime Minister for us, you've been a great leader for us, but time's up, she went. When Theresa May was confronted by the reality of what happened to her, she went. When Tony Blair, after 10 years in office, but took a decision eventually that it was time to move on, Gordon Brown was taking over, he went. There are certain pressures in politics, and sometimes you have to lead on them, other times you have to respond on them. And I do think out of this, there has got to be a fundamental review, both of our political system and indeed of our media culture, because I think the media, and particularly the right-wing press, has a massive responsibility for getting this guy into office in the first place, for Brexit, which is going to be his only legacy. And that is the tragedy of this whole thing. A liar and a crook was put into Downing Street to, quote, get Brexit done. We're going to get rid of Johnson, but Brexit we're going to have to live with for some time. So this is what's happened, Kay. We put a liar and a crook into a position where in our constitution it depends on people who get elected to Parliament being honourable. He's utterly dishonourable. He's a disgrace to politics. He's a disgrace to Parliament and to this country. And the sooner he's out of that building, preferably in the back of a Black Maria, the better.
Well, that's not going to happen, as we both know, but it's a good soundbite. Is it him, though, or is it the people that are around him? You know, are the people around him strong enough to, you know, there's no Hezza in there at the moment, is there? There's nobody of his stature, there's no elder statesman to go in and say, time's up, off you go.
Well, that is a problem, but that's what happens when this goes back to who and what he is as a leader. He has deliberately surrounded himself with weak people. He's appointed there are people in that cabinet who wouldn't get a job, you know, driving a van. I mean, they're just not very good people. They're not very good at what they do. Can you imagine Nadine Dorries in any other cabinet in history? Can you imagine Suella Braverman is now talking about putting herself forward for the leadership? I mean, these are fourth-rate people. So there may be people in there, and it's not the job. People are saying, why can't the civil servants get him out? It's not their job. They have to try to make things work as best they can. I did an interview on Irish radio yesterday, and Stanley Johnson, Johnson's father, was on, still defending him, still saying he's honest, still saying he's honourable, still saying he's the right person for the job. I mean, for heaven's sake, are his family not going to step up? Is his brother not? Are his brothers not going to step up? Is his sister not going to step up? This guy is doing massive damage to one of the most important countries in the world. Anybody who has access to him should be getting the message in. For heaven's sake, just, you know, do the decent thing, do the honourable thing, resign, and let the country try to rebuild from the absolute chaos that you've created.
Good to talk to you as always, Alastair. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The Prime Minister was at the Liaison Committee yesterday, which is basically the chair people of all of the other committees in Parliament, and he was answering questions from them. This is one of the things that happened.
You're asking about something that is not going to happen, unless everybody's so crazy as to try and, have a new...
Can I just remind you that when the Prime Minister Major seemed to be threatening a general election because he was having trouble with the Maastricht Bill, it did his no reputation any good at all.
Was in that meeting. He's with us now. I saw quite a few, obviously it was being screened live on Sky at the time, and I saw a few of you checking your phones from time to time. What were you aware of was happening in Downing Street, Chris, while you were in that committee meeting?
Well, we knew that, you know, more people were resigning. We knew that that cabinet ministers were apparently going to Downing Street to tell him that it was time to go. I don't know whether you've ever seen the musical Hamilton. I've always thought that the best musical song that represents what politics is all about is that song, The Room Where It Happens, The Room Where It Happens, because that's kind of where you want to be as a politician, in the room where it happens. And it was really weird yesterday because we had the Prime Minister in front of us, but I couldn't really tell whether this was the room where it was happening or not. Because so many things seemed to be going on elsewhere, and we knew more of what was happening than he did. It was like, I think it's called dramatic irony, isn't it, when the audience knows more than the characters that they're watching. And I mean, I have to say, I think we're in a very, very dangerous position now. The British Constitution relies on two things. First of all, on parliamentary democracy, not a presidential system. So the Prime Minister doesn't have a mandate at all. The only mandate is for the governing party that wins a general election and has a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. And if the trust of that party has gone from their leader, then that person no longer has a mandate to run the country. But I think he's genuinely... I'm not a medical man, but I think he's unhinged. I think he's completely delusional now. And that is terribly dangerous in our system, because the second fundamental principle is honour. We rely, because we don't have a written constitution and there's nothing that says, if the Prime Minister goes beyond the pale or does something that is completely out of order, who steps in? There's nothing to say that in the British Constitution. So it relies on the Prime Minister being honourable and being able to read the writing on the wall. But at the moment, the writing on the wall is like 18 foot high and in, burning capital letters, and he still can't read it. But we haven't got a security minister anymore. Half the departments have no ministers in them at all. Meetings in Parliament which are meant to be considering legislation today, have been cancelled because there's no minister to stand up. So we don't have a government. We're not functioning. And that puts the country in a very dangerous position. And I can't see. I mean, it was interesting yesterday when I pushed the Prime Minister on if there were another vote of confidence in him in the Conservative Party and he lost it, would he go? I don't think he said yes.
I don't think it would be up
dangerous.
To him, would it? Don't think it would be up to him by then, would it?
Well, who is it up to then, you see? That's the whole point. In our system, it relies on having an honourable person as Prime Minister who knows when the game is up. But if you've had a third of the Cabinet have resigned and more of the Cabinet have done this rather odd thing of going and saying, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, it's time that you went. The game's up. This cannot continue. But still haven't resigned, maybe for some kind of vague honourable reason or because they think they're indispensable to the nation or something, I don't know what. But in that, and Sue Braverman, the oddest of lot, saying, I think he should go, and I'm going to stand for leader, talking of delusional, but still not resigning. I mean, it's like honour has evaporated, and I suspect that's because in the end, I don't know, when you watch him, or when I was watching him yesterday, his eyes weren't really focusing on us, and he leapt. 1 minute he would be very, very, boosterish, Billy Bunter, sort of, isn't it jolly gosh, it's absolutely amazing this, I've never had so much fun in my life. And then the next moment, sad, terribly, terribly sad. And I just think there's a bit of an abandoned child in there.
Bear with me 1 second, because I'm just hearing that the Pensions Minister, Guy Opperman, has now resigned. I make that 5 so far this morning. Carry on, Chris Bryant, sorry.
Right, well, I mean, it makes the point again, doesn't it? There are so many parts of government that just simply cannot function today. He won't be able to replace all of these people. And we can't just let this drift for another weekend. We have enemies around the world, Russia, China, others. I mean, the security services yesterday were making very serious claims about what Chinese operatives are trying to do in the UK at the moment. We need to be on top of these things. We can't have a government that simply isn't functioning.
The Prime Minister would say in response to that, I suppose, Chris Bryant, he would say, you can be as rude as you want about me, Chris Bryant. I'm the Prime Minister, and we know from Downing Street sources that he's going ahead with his reshuffle this morning.
Well, I think he will find it very difficult to complete that reshuffle. He won't have a full set of ministers. And I would just say to, somebody like Priti Patel, who, for all the rows that I've had with her in many different places, I think, Priti, you believe that the security of this country matters. I think you have a duty now. You have a duty, and you know what you have to do.
But she's already told him to go, hasn't she? Are you suggesting that it would take Priti Patel to resign as Home Secretary to force the Prime Minister to do the same thing?
Well, I note that none of the Chancellor's gone, but I think the Home Secretary has a special duty for the security of the nation, and I worry. Just as Julian Smith said earlier on, I think, Radio 4, that this is a Trump moment. I don't mean that Boris Johnson is going to try and get people to, rush the capital kind of thing or rush Parliament Square, because I don't think the people are with the Prime Minister here. But it's a bit like Alice through the looking glass, isn't it? I mean, nothing is what it seems. He talks about his mandate, but he doesn't have a mandate. There is no personal mandate. That is narcissism. It's a form of sociopathy.
On that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Thank you, Chris Bryant, who was at the Liaison Committee yesterday. Tomorrow, as we were chatting to Chris Bryant, another resignation.
Yes, Guy Opperman, the Pensions Minister, and in his letter, he says to the Prime Minister, I was particularly angry about the breaches of the COVID rules in January of last year, and that is because he tragically lost his twins, I believe they were premature, and couldn't visit his wife in hospital because of the COVID rules. So he was very angry about the Partygate scandal. He said he'd hoped the Prime Minister, he believed the Prime Minister when he told him he was resetting, drawing a line under it, having a new team, and that doesn't seem to have happened. So that is a very pointed resignation letter from Guy Opperman and a reminder of how we got here. This is not just about Chris Pincher and the current difficulties. It's a lot of residual anger because of Partygate and because for many MPs, the breach of trust over Owen Paterson. So this is a number of issues, and clearly he's come to the conclusion that he cannot support the Prime Minister anymore.
OK, tomorrow, thanks very much indeed.